All right. Well, Josh, tell us about Alanis Morissette.
I will. Alanis Morissette and Jagged Little Pill. In the opening montage, you heard You Ought to Know, and now you're going to hear Hand in My Pocket. Okay, Jagged Little Pill, released June 13th, 1995. Alanis Morissette is Canadian-American. She is born 1974 in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. This is her third studio album. Her first two albums were dance pop, and before she transitioned to the sound, she was known as kind of the Debbie Gibson of Canada. That was the kind of style. I saw some of her early stuff. It reminded me, or music videos kind of reminded me of not only Debbie Gibson, but like New Kids on the Block in terms of like dancing and like style and things like that.
Kids Incorporated.
Yeah.
You might be saying this. I'll lay back. I remember her from something else.
He'll do it. He'll say it.
Yeah,
I'll say it.
Okay.
I think you're thinking of You Can't Do That on Television.
Yes.
Yes, she was in 5 episodes of that. That was a Nickelodeon show from the early 80s, or at least I remember it from that. She has 10 studio albums, with her latest being 2022's The Storm Before the Calm. She's got genres as alt-rock, post-grunge, contemporary rock, or indie rock. Influences, I couldn't find things she said specifically, but like 10,000 Maniacs, Sinead O'Connor, Patti Smith, Madonna, Annie DeFranco, other singer-songwriters like that. Similar artists: Pink, Meredith Brooks, Halsey, Florence and the Machine, Garbage, Natalie Imbruglia, John mentioned her earlier. Ironic reached number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100. Jagged Little Pill was number 1 for 12 weeks, and her next 2 albums both debuted at number 1. Some fun facts. So she sings in a mezzo-soprano voice. She was not only on You Can't Do That on Television for 5 episodes, she was also in the 1999 Kevin Smith film Dogma as God. This is the 4th best-selling album of the 90s, with over 33 million copies sold. She is the 2nd best-selling female artist of the 90s, behind Shania Twain. She is the 2nd best-selling female artist of all time, behind Shania Twain in terms of albums, and it's the 14th best-selling album of all time. She won the 1996 Grammy for Album of the Year. She was nominated for 5 Grammys and won 5. She was nominated for 9 Grammys and won 5. She was dropped by her label MCA after her first 2 albums because they couldn't really figure out what she was doing. She wanted to try something different. She was kind of growing out of that teen type of sound. So she moved from Toronto to LA before this album, and she met producer and songwriter Glenn Ballard. He's a guy that has written songs for many people we've talked about. He's more of a songwriter than a producer, I would say, based on looking at his like Wikipedia, but he's written for Paula Abdul and Wilson Phillips and a bunch of artists. His career goes back to the 70s, basically. She co-wrote this album with him, and he also produced this album. Other albums he produced would be Dave Matthews Band, Every Day, which is later in the decade, and No Doubt's Return of Saturn. Those are the kind of higher profile ones that I would recognize. Morissette sings vocals and harmonica on this album, while Glenn Ballard plays guitar, keyboards, and drum machine. And there are various studio musicians throughout on this album as well. This album really blew up.
Didn't her live band have Taylor Hawkins from the Foo
Yes.
Fighters in it?
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
I'm going to get to that too. Things blew up for this album once You Ought to Know started playing on K-Rock in LA. That was kind of the breaking point for her in terms of getting notice and kind of, becoming as popular as she did. People started requesting that song. It was like the most requested song for a long time. The video started being played on MTV. That propelled her even further. with 6 singles, Jagged Little Pill stayed in the top 20 on the Billboard 200 for more than a year. So that's also longevity, as we've talked about, for artists back in the 90s is different than today. The song You Oughta Know is not about Dave Coulier, despite what you probably heard. And guitar on that track is played by Dave Navarro with Flea on bass, actually. There's a 2021 doc titled Jagged that's on HBO or Max as part of their music box
I've
series.
seen it. It's good.
Yeah, you liked it? Yeah, I watched it this morning. I liked it as well. Gave some additional kind of insight and context to a lot of this album and kind of her early career. So check that out. That's on the Combing the Stacks music documentary list on Letterboxd. And as John said, Taylor Hawkins was the drummer of her band for their 18-month tour around the world for this album. And he left Alanis after this tour was done and joined the Foo Fighters because they were looking for a drummer. And he is died last year. He's no longer with us. But and there was a Jagged Little Pill musical in 2018 that went to Broadway in 2019 and closed, after COVID, or after reopening from COVID. It closed in December of 2021. So I feel like this album was everywhere. I own this album, actually, on cassette. So let's start with Matt. What did you think of listening to Jagged Little Pill this time?
Well, first of all, I forgot to do the numbers, Josh.
Oh, dang. Sorry.
Or you forgot to tell me to do the numbers.
Yeah.
But whatever, I'll do the numbers right now. Jagged Little Pill by Alanis Morissette comes in at number 67 in the 1990s on Best Ever Albums. Number 7 in 1995. Number 355 of all time. It is Alanis Morissette's highest rated album on Best Ever Albums. The only album that we're covering tonight that came in on Rolling Stone's list at number 69. And Alanis Morissette ranked number 287 of overall artists on Best Ever Albums. And yeah, man, this album is massive. Also, it looks like Benmont Tench makes another appearance here because he plays he's the organ on some of these songs here. So pretty cool. Yeah, this record is pretty amazing, I think. I owned this after hearing the single of You Oughta Know, which is just as epic today as it was when it came out. I mean, what a freaking song that is, man.
Yeah.
She just and I remember that video, like she's kind of in the beach, but you can never see her face because her hair's like all like there's this kind of menacing anger behind this big mat of hair, just going nuts, just tearing it up on this song. And you just listen, and even for a non-lyric guy, just like hearing her anger at this guy and the way that she sings this song, it is like the ultimate F you breakup song. Like, you hurt me and I screw you. Like, there's a lot of energy there, and just catapults it. And it's a great musically. It's just awesome, and her voice certainly stands out as being really unique. It's very distinct. It's got this, I can't even describe it, but it's like the way that she kind of, puts everything together when she's really like, either screaming, and not even when she's being really loud, but it's just, she's got a very unique presence with her voice. It's the best way I can describe it.
It's like an interesting range where she can go up to like almost cracking or kind of like this like yodeling type of thing, or like what we've heard in Irish artists or something.
It's like her voice, it's like cracking somewhat, and it's a little nasally perhaps, but and she does have a great range as well. So but this is just one great song after another. I remember when I bought this record, just being like the first time I heard it, going, wow, this is just really one great song after another. There's 6 singles, I think is what I saw there.
6 singles.
That did all really well, but even the songs that aren't singles are just great. I love the juxtaposition of some of the songs too, like the way, like You Oughta Know is such a powerhouse of a song, and then it goes into Perfect, which is just this like calm, cool, very pretty, sonically sounding song. Really, kind of more interesting lyrics there as well, about just the pressures of being perfect, and and everybody telling you to keep being better, and and it's that how difficult that is, and how what that does to somebody. But it's got a lot of drum machine too, I think, which I think in some ways could be off-putting, but I don't know, man. It works. The production here works for me. My guess is it's probably falling in line with some of the stuff that you guys were talking about last week with Oasis, like lots of stuff up front in the production. But I don't know. The music is so there for me. And some of the deeper cuts, like Forgiven, I've always really liked that song. That's got such that crescendo at the end when she's just belting it out is just a really musically, it's just a very interesting, very powerful song. And it's just, it goes from one great song to the next. It's easily a classic. It's, I really like, how strong of a presence she has. And I saw her live. I saw her do this a couple years ago. She toured with Garbage, and I went with my sister, and she played this whole album. Although I don't think she played it start to finish. I think she played all the songs from the album in a different order. And but even the last song I love the second You Ought to Know has more guitar to it, which I kind of like that version. It's the same song but with more guitar. And then they do that hidden track, the a cappella Your House, which is just, man, that's a powerful song too. So she's covering a lot of topics. She can be really serious, really angry. She can be really sad. She can be goofy, so she's hitting like all these emotions and stuff. And musically, it just works so well. So it's a classic record. I've always loved it. I loved coming back to it. I only needed to listen to it once, but I loved every second of it. Big thumbs up for me.
Nice.
Yep, this is one of the albums of the 90s, isn't it, guys? Like, it's one that it felt like everybody I knew owned, myself included. I definitely owned this CD. I believe my sister owned it as well. It was one of our only ones where, like, both of us had a copy because we listened to it. And you're right, Matt. There's all of those singles that you think of immediately. You Ought to Know, which was like a lightning bolt the first time you heard it. It's one of those songs that it instantaneously connected with me and so many others because Alanis Morissette, the video is underrated too because you don't really get a good view of her. She's in the desert kind of going around and you can't kind of tell who she is or what she's doing, and you're listening to just all of this power and you're like, who is this person? Like it just felt like she came out of nowhere. And then you've got Dave Navarro and Flea on the track just grinding away as like an incredible rhythm section, lead guitar, and you're just like, wow, this song's undeniable. And then Ironic, another song that had a very famous video of her in the car and was on the radio all the time. It became one of those songs that was like loved, and then people started to hate it, and then it came around to being like loved again, right? And for me, I never really hated it though. I think it was just a byproduct of people overplaying it, but I was able to kind of keep it, in the right amount of plays, before it was there. You Learn, right, was another one that was a hit. There's hits all over this album, right? There's others besides, besides just the three. But Matt's right. The deep cuts on this album are what really stand out later. There really is not a bad song on this album. It's interesting to look at the rest of Glenn Ballard's career because he's doing Wilson Phillips and all these very like, pristine, almost like hair metal production things, and that's on this album. It's a super cleanly produced album. It's not over loud though, like a lot of albums are starting to become that we're listening to. It's a really clean production, but it's a production that does a great job of putting Alanis Morissette's voice in the front, which is where it should be, because it's so confessional, this album. There's music on it, but really it feels at times like she's singing directly to you, like out of her diary. I think lyrically, I never really realized, like as I was listening to it real time, but then I watched that doc, Josh, and then you listen to it. There's clearly a theme of like her being taken advantage of in many different ways by the industry itself. A lot of like these, there's a song that's specifically right about like how naive she was and how taken advantage she was, and almost sounds casting couchy at times. And when that she was like a child, musician and child actress, and she sort of touches on that in that video as well.
Yeah, she definitely they allude to that for sure.
They sure do. And like when you listen to the lyrics on this, it's kind of like, oh wow, yeah. And it does become very clear that like who she's talking about, I don't know much about Dave Coulier, right? But like it definitely thematically, right, seems like it's a music industry executive, a lot of times that she's talking about in these stories. So I was just something I never picked up on. And she was dropped by her record companies too, you know what I mean? So there's that bitterness there. And I always like the origin story of her kind of like reinventing herself and just going in and betting on herself. And there's a desperation to this whole album that I think that's why it connects with so many people. It just has an emotional resonance to it that oftentimes when people say it's like somebody's reading to you from their diary, it could be like eye rolly, like, yeah, you have to have an interesting diary, right? Like for other people to care about it. But in this case, I think it's less like the content itself and more just you can hear and connect to all the things she is. She's angry, she's vulnerable, she's kind of like a love junkie at times. There's all these different things, right, that she's cycling between, and it's a complex mix of a human. And that ultimately is why this album sold all the albums that it did. It's one of one kind of in terms of scratching all of these buttons, and it's a great album. It's a very easy thumbs up, and it still is an album that sounds as great today and not dated as it did then, which is saying something, because usually when you hear an album that sold this many copies, it's of a time and a place, but this is not. I could see a kid, picking this up now who's 13, 14 years old and immediately getting it, right?
Right.
Because there's not much you need to know outside of just hearing it. So there you go.
Yeah, I was surprised how much I remembered off this album. I was able to pretty much sing along to almost every song or parts of every song listening through again. I hadn't listened to this song since, I owned it probably. It was everywhere. And I agree with you guys. I feel like it does hold up really well. And there's, the doc makes this point at the end too, but there is a clear through line between her and like Taylor Swift in terms of like the lyric writing and like the emotional honesty and the storytelling ability. And I think that is all throughout here. I really appreciate her lyric writing on this. I think she's able to write lyrics that are easy to understand but have like this imagery to them and honesty to them that I really respond to. I think that contributes to the success of the album and the appeal, because it's so easy to like sing along. Along with these melodies, you have these like really great lyrics. Ironic would be like the perfect example. That song has so many clear things that are memorable about the lyrics as well. You can like rain on your wedding and like 1,000 spoons when all you need is a knife. Like they're very like easy to remember and like pull from. And I feel like that this album has all of that over and over again. I appreciated the range of emotions too on this album, not just the kind of the angsty and anger that is here, but also this time around, like kind of the ability to fall in love. Like Head Over Feet is such like a kind of a sweet song told in like a unique way. It's kind of like, you did this to me by being so nice, like by like being a good person, like you made me fall in love with you, which is kind of like a slight spin on something like that. I like you guys are right though, there is no bad tracks on this too, which is remarkable. I really like Not the Doctor this time, the third to last track. I thought the lyrics on that were really good, and I like that song as a deeper cut that I didn't remember as well. And yeah, they just do really, as far as like the music and the instruments go, it's kind of got this like grunge sound to it, but it's not really like full on grunge, if that makes sense. And there's space. I'm glad, like you guys said, like she's out in front with her voice. That's kind of should be like the main selling point and kind of feature of the album. And I feel like the music and the harmonica, which I also think is a nice touch, add the depth to her lyrics and her voice, which I appreciate. But yeah, this was in some ways better than I remember. I just don't think I either appreciate it the same way I do now, obviously, but just how well it holds up and how easy it is to listen to. And it's really an example of those albums that that become super popular that stay good versus like ones that, you know, we talked about like Hootie and the Blowfish, or there'll be other ones coming up, or Eagles or something that sold like massive amounts that maybe don't stand the test of time, or we don't appreciate in the way that a lot of other people do. And I feel like this one is something that, you know, when there was a monoculture, everyone around the world liked this album. So
yeah,
and responded to it. So yeah, this is an elite album, I think.
Yeah,
and thumbs up for me. I'm glad we revisited it.